It is my pleasure to introduce you all to our richly experienced and dynamic moderator, Ms. Mirai Chatterjee. She is a chairperson, SEWA Cooperative Federation of 107 primary women's cooperatives and the director, Social Security at SEWA. She was a founder for SEWA's healthcare, childcare, and insurance cooperatives. She joined SEWA in 1984, and she was the general secretary right after its founder, Ms. Ila Bhatt. Ms. Chatterjee holds a master's from Johns Hopkins University School of Public Health, USA, and a BA in History and Science from Harvard University. So without further ado, I hand you over to Mirai Ben and have a wonderful event. Thank you.
Thanks, Monica. A very warm welcome to all of you at this special event, coming together, forming enterprises, entering the economy. As Monica said, organized by SEWA Bharat, the National Federation of the SEWA movement, in partnership with UN Women and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. There's now an increasing body of evidence and experience about the power of women's collective enterprises and their seminal role in furthering women's economic empowerment. Many of us have witnessed how women have come together and built their organizations where they are the users, the managers, and the owners. And not only have individual lives changed, achieving women's much cherished dream of work and income security and social security, but also women have worked hard to ensure that thousands of other women too are firmly on the path to women's economic empowerment and self-reliance. These women's enterprises are the engines of growth and development, and with a commitment to inclusion, democratic functioning and participation, and with a deep respect for the environment. Today, we will learn how these enterprises offer women opportunities to work and to earn, even more critical in the current pandemic period, when so many women, more than men, have lost work and income and are pushed further into poverty and debt. Despite the latest huge challenge before them, women and their enterprises, as we shall soon see, are leading the efforts to build sustainable livelihoods, promoting social protection, and are working to rejuvenate local and national economies. We have gathered here today to share Indian, Ethiopian, and other global experiences of women's collective enterprises. We will exchange ideas for action to strengthen women's collective enterprises, including during and after the pandemic. We will hear from informal women workers from their experiences in collectives and building resilience. And we will also hear from panelists from civil society, representatives from the government, the private sector, and international organizations who will share their insights with us. I am sure it will be a rich harvest with varied and diverse experiences. And now I'd like to go to our first speaker. I'm delighted to introduce my senior colleague, Renana Jhabvala. Renana Jhabvala is president of SEWA Bharat and has been associated with SEWA, a national union of 1.8 million workers, almost since its inception in 1972. She has been active for decades in organizing unions, cooperatives, various collectives, and financial institutions. She is a founder of WeGo, an international organization committed to voice, visibility, and validity of informal women workers. She's also a well-published author, and in 1990, she was awarded the Padma Shri from the Government of India for all her efforts in social work. Renana Ben, the floor is yours.
Okay, so let me just start. As Mirai Ben mentioned, SEWA is Self-Employed Women's Association. It was registered as a trade union, I think nearly now 48 years ago. And the founder is SEWA Bharat, and it's a trade union of women in the informal economy. So in urban areas, that means street vendors, domestic workers, home-based workers, rag pickers, all kinds of urban workers. In the rural areas, we look at small farmers, livestock workers, construction workers, and there's a whole variety. When we formed the union, it was to bring women together, to bring collective strength and collectively strive for rights. However, what we found very early on was that the struggle for rights takes a very long time. And these women are poor, vulnerable, and they often don't have either the ability to stay for long struggles, and then of course the laws are not protecting them. And so very early we realized that they need to come together and enter the market. And we started forming enterprises, I think as early as 1975. Our first enterprise a few years later was this bank, long before the microfinance movement started. And then we formed a lot of cooperatives. And subsequent to that, as we expanded from our original state, Gujarat, to other states, we began forming companies. So the SEWA approach, that's what I wanted to really talk about. The SEWA approach is mobilizing first, bringing women together collectively, empowerment first, and then as they realize the need to form enterprises. So the video which you couldn't hear, Geeta Ben, the street vendor, actually joined SEWA because of police harassment. But then looking at the bank in Gujarat, she wanted to form a similar bank for herself and her sisters. Similarly, Sangeeta, the farmer, was joined for health reasons. And the women came together for health. But then they realized that real power comes from income, and they formed a farmers cooperative. So can you put up the first slide, please? SEWA approach is mobilizing, coming together, then forming enterprises. Now the enterprises, the other part of the SEWA approach is that enterprises are not run by outsiders. The women are, of course, the beneficiaries of the enterprises, but they are also the leaders of the enterprises. They are on the board, they manage the governance, and as often as not, they are also in the actual operations. Sangeeta Ben, who you saw, is a woman who is actually part of operations. And finally, what we realize is that enterprises need to be financially sustainable businesses. So you can start with rights, you can mobilize, but until you become a financially sustainable business, governed by women and run by them and for them, you're really not a collective enterprise. And as an example, the examples that we saw, so Geeta Ben, the vendor, street vendor, is president of her, or chairperson of her board. Sangeeta, the farmer, is part of the board of the enterprise. And Sunita is a shareholder and holds an important role in operations. The second slide, please. Now, over the years, many years, SEWA has formed a large number of enterprises. And these enterprises, second slide, these enterprises are of different sizes. So up to now, we have formed 152 enterprises, 152. Some have not survived, many have. And the sizes of these enterprises, the maximum size is from members small, from 100 to 500. There are lots which are up to 1,000. And then there are some which are over 20,000 up to 100,000, and one, I think, which is over 100,000. I think that is about 400,000 members. So we have formed all these enterprises across 11 states with varying numbers of members, and also in many, many different areas. There are health enterprises, there are finance enterprises, there are milk cooperatives, there are pharma enterprises, there are enterprises in the services, there are enterprises of artisans, and so on. The impact is steady work, increase in incomes, but more importantly, an empoweredness and an awareness, increase in social status, and an access to a whole lot of benefits, including those from the government. A lot of other speakers are going to talk about that, so I won't get into the details. But I would like to say that what we saw during COVID, even today, and especially during the lockdown, was that those women who were members of enterprises found it easier to get relief, food, cash. They got better employment and incomes. And I have a figure here. A study by HomeNet South Asia shows that at the worst of the lockdown, at the most severe lockdown, those in enterprises had 57% of those women in enterprises still had work, whereas those not in enterprises was barely 22. Of course, women in the enterprises also had far more information about the health issues. And this approach of mobilizing and enterprise development does support each other. For example, the artisan enterprise that we talked about, RUA, it gives higher rates, obviously, to the women working who are part of the shareholder. But because of that, the other women who are not part of the enterprises have been demanding higher rates from their contractors. Conversely, during COVID, the union mobilized women, identified those who desperately needed work and those who had sewing machines, and the enterprise gave them work making masks. However, although there is a natural affinity between mobilizing union work and enterprises, there are difficulties. The skill for mobilizing is very different from that of business. Women who come in with a rights-based approach find it very difficult to think about profits and marketing and finance. And so in many ways, SEWA has developed specialized agencies. Mirai represents the SEWA Cooperative Federation, which focuses on capacity building and advocacy. We have the SEWA Manager School, which brings in management skills. And recently, we have started a new experiment the last 2 years with the help of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to form an enterprise support system. And now may I have the third slide, please. The enterprise support system aims to fulfill, no, the one before this, please. The enterprise support system, the one before this, please, yes. It's a hub for nurturing women-run enterprises, collective enterprises, and it provides a variety of services ranging from mentorship, financial strengthening, which is extremely important, compliance, business planning and monitoring, capacity building, and any other particular service that the enterprise needs. The next slide, please. This experiment we have only been doing for 1.5 years or so, and within that 1.5 years, we reached to 11 enterprises with 20,000, a little more than 20,000 women. We found that all of them had been in some way impacted. There was some needs-based support where we were able to reach over 1 lakh, means 100,000 women. But we really focused to see where the enterprises were able to increase revenue. And in our study, we looked at 5 enterprises and found that in 1.5 years, they had increased their revenue 3 times. Can you take it off, please? I'd like to end by saying that what we have found with these enterprises is that they not only provide economic benefits, but there are many social benefits also. Women who are involved with them become more open, go out more, are more in their own decision-making within the home and outside the home and in the market and in political processes. But to do all that does require investment. It requires financial investment, it requires skills, it requires commitment. And the other thing is that we are starting at a level with women who have never done this kind of thing before, who are workers, yes, who have the skills, yes, who have the desire, yes. Can I have the last slide, please? But it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes years. And so, the next slide, please. And so, if we really want to promote women's collective enterprises, women's economic empowerment, we need a long time horizon and we need the resources. And without the resources, these women will not move forward. So I have this, I really want to say that let's invest and let's give them time. And we will see a real revolution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Renana Bhen. And now I'd like to go straight to Tsigie Haile. Tsigie, who we had the pleasure of meeting some years ago. Tsigie Haile is the founder and director of the Organization for Women in Self-Employment, better known as WISE, based in Ethiopia, and directly serving over 45,000 women and girls in their efforts to improve the quality of their lives. Inspired by SEWA's work, Tsigie set up WISE 23 years ago, and she's a renowned leader for women's economic empowerment in her country. Tsigie Haile has her BBA from Addis Ababa University and an MBA from the Netherlands. Tsigie Haile, dear friend, over to you.
Thank you, Mirai. Let me have my slides. Okay. Thank you, Mirai. It's a great pleasure, to be in this event. And I thank you for, including WISE. Of course, as you said, inspired by SEWA, the African sister of SEWA. I will dwell on the experience of WISE in women-led collective enterprises, enabling sustainable jobs and improved financial services. Mirai has briefly touched upon, has said a little bit about WISE. We are a local non-governmental organization focusing on women's empowerment. And our mandate is on building agency of low-income women. In this regard, what we do is organize the women into mainly saving and credit cooperatives so that they can access resources as well as services. And the other thing that we do is offer different kinds of training, soft skills as well as hard skills to the women, so that they can they can build their agency. And the training is not only for the women, but also in certain cases it goes to the male family members. And the other key intervention is creating platforms where the women come and discuss their issues, learn new things, and so on. As we've been in existence for the 23 years, and we have tried to not only count numbers, but also measure our success rate. And in a study, in an assessment, we recorded around 80% success rate. When it comes to organizing grassroots women in our country, there are different types of collectives. One is the saving and credit cooperatives that we use as our key model. The other is the partnership enterprises, normally get together to undertake economic ventures. We also have producer or market cooperatives, and these get together to produce different products or to market their products. We also have self-help groups, or in the village level saving and lending associations, and other similar groups. In addition to these, we have traditional institutions or collectives that we call Iddir, Mahbar, and the like, that bring together women and create opportunities for experience sharing, resource sharing, and the like. When it comes to our experience in saving and credit cooperatives and partnership enterprises, first of all, it's to, in a nutshell, it's to create opportunities for the women. As we all know, the first step toward in women's empowerment journey is coming out of the home and then joining women-only space, and such efforts create this opportunity for women to come out of their home and join women-only space where they start their empowerment journey. Bringing them together in SACCOs and partnership enterprises benefit the women so that they are included in the financial sector. They save, they borrow, and they enjoy women-friendly systems. They decide collectively, and they also enjoy or benefit from insurance schemes. These collectives are women-owned or member-owned, and so the members make decisions. This creates to the women opportunities for leadership development. The other thing is access to training. The women can access life-changing training that change their knowledge, skills, attitude, and practice. And they also learn collectively. They share their experiences among themselves. They also access counseling, health counseling, business counseling, legal counseling, and it's also the training program is also a platform for building innovation. The other thing is when women come together, their voice becomes stronger. Even at the household level, they start to be heard. At the community, at the local administration level, they can make their voice heard for equal access and control over resources as well as services. And also, it's a representation. They are represented.
Put Tsigie's bio in the chat. Tsigie,
hi. Okay. Yes. The other thing is they access market linkages, and through getting organized, they can take part in bazaars, exhibitions. They can access marketing premises. So this is an avenue for the women's product, to get to the market. Another benefit of coming together, as we have learned, is solidarity. When they come together, they help each other, and this is seen during the COVID-19 crisis, because the semi credit cooperatives and the enterprises are owned by the members. They decided that there should be a grace period of 3 months, for paying back loans, and they waived the interest rate, and also helped each other, especially those who were highly affected, could be supported through different means to become resilient during this crisis. So it was very clear that being in a collective, helps women during times of crisis. And the other thing is in terms of collective mobilization of resources. These women access continuous services, continuous resources from being organized in collectives. When it comes to issues of organizing or collective coming together, we note or we realize there is a lack of proactive and supportive policies and practices in our country, and we also see that there is no strong promotion of role model collectives, especially when it comes to economic ventures. And the gender issues, yeah, it's there, the unpaid care work, the gender-based violence, or the lack of resources in budget, as my, the previous speaker indicated, that resources are essential, so that investing in such collectives of women at the grassroots level is extremely essential. And the other thing is the competition on resources and opportunities. When there are in an environment where there are constraints, it's the stronger that get hold of the opportunities. So in an environment where unemployment is very high or resources are very scarce, it's men who are the stronger that get hold of the resources and opportunities. So it's an issue for women. What we have learned throughout the past 23 years, let me mention a few points. When well, bigger size or size matters actually. A stronger voice can come from bigger size. As we have seen with SEWA, 1.8 million means a lot, and their strong voice comes from their size. And the other thing is the associations. Associations are great assets for women. When they come together, they can be heard, they can learn, they can build their assets and so on. So and the other thing that we've learned is women, irrespective of their status, have leadership experience that they bring from their homes to their associations. So when they are in associations, they can, adequately exercise leadership of the associations. And finally, I'd like to say that we are working in collectives has many challenges, particularly when it relates to economic activities. Many ventures, do not, well, in our case, have not survived, for long. So these are the challenges that we are facing. I hope I have not passed my limits, Mirabel. And that's all I have to share. And I will be very pleased to address other issues during the question and answer session. Thank you.
Thanks, Sister Tsigie. We now go to our third speaker. I'm delighted to welcome Ms. Anita Bhatia, the Assistant Secretary General and UN Women's Deputy Executive Director for Resource Management, UN System Coordination, Sustainability, and Partnerships. Before joining UN Women, Ms. Bhatia has had a distinguished career at the World Bank Group, serving in various senior leadership and management positions, both at headquarters and in the field, and has rich experience and expertise. Ms. Bhatia holds an MA in Political Science from Yale University and a Juris Doctor in Law from Georgetown University. Welcome, Ms. Anita Bhatia. The floor is yours for 12 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mirai. It's a real pleasure for me to be here with you today. And I want to just say a very warm welcome, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all our distinguished panelists, to participants, friends and colleagues who may be joining from different parts of the globe. UN Women is absolutely delighted to have co-organized this panel with SEWA Bharat and with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And I have the very high honor of talking to you today about this critical topic of women's collective enterprises, and particularly the potential role that they can play in crisis recovery, response, and building back better, but more importantly, building back equal. Let me start by just offering a few thoughts on where we find ourselves today after the year of the pandemic. I think we've all recognized that this new normal that we are living in has come at an enormous cost to women. And while much has been written and said about the costs of the pandemic for women, I think it is only now that we are fully beginning to appreciate the size and the scope of the fallout on women. We have data now that suggests that as many as 47 million additional women are going to fall into poverty in this coming year. And this is on top of an already grossly unequal social and economic system in many parts of the world, where income inequalities, wealth disparities, and extreme poverty have made women and girls extremely vulnerable. Women occupy most of the jobs in the hardest hit economic sectors. And we saw that the pandemic really had an impact on women in three major areas. One, income, because women lost part of the informal economy than men do. Second, we saw that the sectors that were hit were sectors that are heavily feminized: retail, tourism, trade, domestic work. And what we are seeing now is that women in the formal sector, at least, are not going back to work in the same way as men are. And in the informal sector, because opportunities have disappeared, we will see a decline in labor force participation, and we are beginning to pick this up already. Second, we saw huge impacts on health because there were instances of women not being able to access life-saving and critical medical services during the pandemic because governments appropriately pivoted towards solving for the public health crisis that the virus presented. But you can't really tell a woman who needs an abortion to come back in 6 months. So, you know, we are going to see long-term consequences from that blip in lack of access to health services. And then it was exacerbated during the pandemic. Much has been written about this, but I want to say two things about the violence. First, that the silver lining, if you will, of the pandemic was that the issue of violence against women really shifted into the realm of public policy, away from being considered because it became clear that there was actually a shadow pandemic of violence against women. And of course, if there's violence against women, they cannot actually participate in any productive way in society or the community or the economy. So this is the background of what the pandemic has done to women. Now I'd like to come to the issue of women's collective enterprises and the role they play, have played, and can play in building back better. We have heard both from WISE and from the film and the experience of SEWA that women have innate leadership qualities which they exercise at home, and that these qualities can actually be nurtured and can blossom when they are given the opportunity to form collective enterprises. And we also know that women's voice and agency get strengthened when they are in collective enterprises. So actually, the surprising question that we have to ask ourselves is, you know, why isn't there more work done to actually build a really strong ecosystem for collective enterprises, given that we have many years of experience, both in India, in Ethiopia and other countries, which I'll mention shortly, that show us very clearly what the positive impacts are of having women at the center of development and having women-led development that looks at women not as victims, but as real agents of change. And it is with that perspective and that mindset that I believe we need to go forward. We know that entrepreneurship is really the bedrock of economic empowerment. There is no other way really to grow economies and to grow wealth and to grow people and to grow GDPs. We know that the private sector, informal or formal, is the biggest creator of jobs in the world. And there are very few parts of the world, with the exception of the Arab states, where the state and government actually has a bigger role than the informal sector. But in the rest of the world, economies are dominated by the informal sector. So it is absolutely vital for policymakers to turn their attention to the informal sector and to ask, what are the key interventions that can make this sector flourish? So I want to say a little bit about what the UN has been doing here, and then come to what I think are the key issues that we need to focus on, both as the UN, but also for our donors, for philanthropy, and for others who are interested in really seeing transformation through collective enterprises. So at the UN, a couple of things to mention. First, the UN has had and had for years a high-level panel on economic empowerment, which had been convened by the former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. It was hosted by UN Women, and it recognized very clearly this fundamental role that you have so nicely outlined in the previous presentations on collective organization entrepreneurship as a key driver for women's economic empowerment, but more broadly for sustainable development. And we have seen organizations like SEWA, like WISE, like BRAC in Bangladesh, as well as the Indian government's flagship National Rural Livelihoods Mission, which have adopted women's collective leadership and entrepreneurship as a conscious strategy to promote women's economic empowerment. I'm very pleased at our partnership with the Ministry of Rural Development in India, because I think what this National Rural Livelihoods Mission does through its programmatic strategy, its technical support on gender responsive budgeting for state action plans, and the implementation of gender responsive livelihoods programs is really very, very important. And we have seen examples of how this mission has supported over 45 million women in collectively saving $1.4 billion, leveraging $20 billion from commercial banks by organizing women's self-help groups, institutional platforms, and providing access to financial services and markets. And we saw that during the pandemic, a lot of these groups were mobilized to produce over 20 million, almost 20 million masks, and to tackle the shortages of personal protective equipment. So we saw wonderful examples of women turning the crisis into opportunity by expanding markets for essential items such as food, health, and hygiene products. A couple of other global examples. In South Africa, UN Women has partnered with the Amatole District Municipality and Watchdog, which is a nonprofit organization to support women entrepreneurs and cooperatives, also to strengthen their capacity to produce PPE equipment during the crisis. In Senegal, the Women's Rice Network of the North was able to access credit lines to undertake programmatic work in the context of producing, in the context of a climate smart agriculture program. In the Arab states, we have worked with networks of women entrepreneurs and cooperatives to implement national financial inclusion strategies by providing both financial and non-financial resources, mainly technical assistance and advice to women, including women in refugee camps. So, you know, we have a breadth of global experience that has allowed us to extract lessons by looking at patterns across the globe and analyzing what is common to all of these women's groups. And we already heard some of that this morning. So there are a couple of key principles that I want to highlight that I feel are absolutely crucial for the success of collective enterprises. The first is feminist leadership, because it allows that vision of transformation of gender relations to be fundamental to the way the enterprise is run. Second, a very clear sense of identity of women themselves as producers, as economic actors, as decision makers in the family, in the community, and in society at large. The formal recognition and the registration of women's collective enterprises is also key, whether they are farmer cooperatives or producers associations. Engagement with financial institutions and ensuring access to finance. It was mentioned this morning that some of these financial structures had been created long before microfinance. And so, you know, women's organizations actually discovered, I wouldn't call it a silver bullet, but at least somewhat like something like a silver bullet long before microfinance actually came to the fore And this is critical because access to resources but to collateralize other assets that might then lead them to continue to build and to grow both their individual financial situation, but also contribute to the strengthening of the financial sustainability of the actual enterprise. And then the ability to bargain collectively and to speak at scale and in volume is really important for negotiating better access to markets, to supply chains, to ecosystems where products and goods can be traded, and to influence policies that have a direct bearing on these women's lives and livelihoods. I really believe that collectives have the potential to overcome the challenges that women entrepreneurs face, to unleash their potential to counteract the negative effects of the economic crisis that we are all living through, and to participate in building back economies, not just better, but equal. What more needs to be done? A lot, actually. We should be doing a lot more to take these models and spread the word across the world. I was so happy to see the presentation on WISE and to hear you say that this has been inspired by the case of SEWA Bharat, because when something is working in development, it is really incumbent on organizations such as ourselves, but also philanthropy, which contributes to strengthening such work, to really take a cut and paste approach where we are able to take lessons of experience from one context and adapt it to another context. But this does not happen fast enough, and it doesn't happen frequently enough. So what more can be done? First of all, it is really important to recognize that women's collective enterprises fill a real gap, a real access gap to public services if they are allowed to flourish and grow. Second, it's clear that collective enterprises improve the quality, the affordability, and the equity of service provision. And so that's something that governments need to recognize more visibly. Third, it actually has positive impacts on social cohesion. And as we've seen, it provides economic benefits as well. So what are the things that governments need to do more of? First, provide grants, fiscal incentives, and other policy measures that create an enabling ecosystem for collective enterprises. Second, there need to be tax incentives that make it easier for these enterprises to flourish. There should be a different tax regime. Third, there must be actual recognition of a social enterprise as a different kind of enterprise. Several countries, the UK, the US, Korea, and others actually recognize social enterprises and have a law on them. Now, India approximates this because we have a very strong rural development strategy that incorporates this recognition of collective enterprises. So I do think the government strategy is the right one. I do think, however, that a lot of other countries can learn from this and can actually seek to replicate the lessons of experience that SEWA Bharat offers to the rest of the world, and that organizations like WISE are now building on and can offer specific lessons from that context, which can also be incorporated into knowledge sharing globally. So UN Women is very committed to working with SEWA, with WISE, with other organizations to harvest these lessons of experience and to disseminate these across the world. The vehicle for doing so Most immediately will be our Action Coalition on Economic Justice and Rights, which is part of the Generation Equality Campaign. So I'd like to end my reflections by inviting you all to join with us in the Action Coalition, because it provides a really innovative platform for the kind of knowledge sharing and push that is needed to really take these marvelous efforts to scale. Thank you so much, Mirai, and back to you.
Thank you very much, Anita. Really appreciate. And I'm afraid we're running a bit behind time, so I'm now going to get a little bit stricter, and I hope the other speakers won't mind if I butt in when 12 minutes are up. So we have a little time, hopefully, for questions. I would like to go straight to our next speaker, Ms. Alka Padhya from the Indian Administrative Service 1990 batch and currently Additional Secretary, Ministry of Rural Development, Government of India. She's the Mission Director of the flagship National Rural Livelihood Mission, which we've just heard about. And she's played a critical role in building the strength of self-help groups and their transformation to collective enterprises through several landmark interventions. Ms. Upadhyay holds a master's degree in public administration from Maxwell School, Syracuse University. Ms. Upadhyay, the floor is yours for the next 12 minutes.
Thank you very much. Number one, for organizing this Women Collectives role into the producer enterprises. And I appreciate what SEWA Bharat has brought forth in terms of partnership with the UN Women and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And truly the journey has just begun. And I mean, I would also thank Ms. Bhatia to have, set the stage for me to carry on from where she left, where she mentioned about the role of the self-help groups and the federations and how they are moving ahead and how we have been able to mobilize women and especially see the stellar work that has been put in during the times of COVID. So it's indeed been a pleasure to hear all of you. I think all of us are here for a similar cause, and we must all join hands to show the world as to what is the might of the women. I would just request somebody to put on my presentation, and while the presentation is being put, I would like to start off, the vision of NRLM was to recognize women as building blocks of the community institutions. And NRLM has had a long journey, and these are such excellent and happy pictures reflecting women's empowerment. Can you please move on to the next slide? So currently where we stand in NRLM is our outreach is phenomenal. We have reached up to 7.35 crore women. They have been mobilized into various federations of the self-help groups. 66.6 lakh self-help groups have been promoted. And what is very creditable is the amount of credit linkage that has gone into the SHG since 2013-14. So any empowerment is not complete without financial involvement and without financial inclusion. So the core of our program has so far been one, community mobilization, two, prepare the community resource persons from amongst the community who take along women in their individual journeys and collective journeys to according to the need or according to whatever are their felt aspirations. And now the second was all over financial inclusion, and you'll be happy to see the numbers. 3.5 lakh crore of bank credit has gone to SHGs. We stand at an NPA for just about 1.8%. This has been a bad year, and everybody has been crying hoarse, and everybody has been saying that it's a bad year, the credit histories have gone bad, but we still are at 1.8%. I really salute the women who have that conviction and the honesty to repay whatever loans that they have taken, not that they have been hit by the pandemic. Now, to see how our vision is to mobilize at least one member from each of the households touched upon by the SHGs. So although we have a number of 7.35 crore women who have been mobilized, only 1.1 crore women so far have been reported to be doing some kind of livelihood intervention activities. So there is a need to move this 1 out of 7 members or families to 7 out of 7 families having been given various livelihood opportunities and making women as important contributors to the economic growth, especially in the rural areas. Next slide, please. Yeah, so women as at the center of development, and MORD, or the Ministry of Rural Development, has indeed kept this particular facet at the center of all its policies. And we are very happy to say that today, while MG and 𝐅𝐸𝐺S, which is the biggest livelihood program that is probably run in any country, 54% of women are employed in MG and 𝐅𝐸𝐺S. So which shows that while across the country we are seeing a dip in female participation, labor participation, but in MG and 𝐅𝐸𝐺S we are seeing more and more women participating, and the number is encouraging. We are at about 55%. Swachh Bharat Mission, or that was the sanitation campaign that India very proudly led, leading to 100% sanitation facilities across the length and breadth of the country. Women was at its center. The Right to Education program, or the 𝐸𝐵 Abhiyan for education, and the National Health Mission, all of this aimed at improvement of social and economic indicators, education being the basic thing, providing health facility being again a very basic necessity, and then the midday meal school program, or the National Food Security Act, looking at the nutrition of the women. So these are all very important individual benefits that have been aimed at to be provided to the women, keeping them at the core. I'm also very happy to share here with you, it's not mentioned on the slide, but one of the most empowering things that we have done of late is under the Pradhan Mantri, or the Prime Minister's Rural Housing Program, make women as one of the owners, either sole or in joint ownership with them. Then talking about community institutions. So two things are very important: building the social capital. While we invested in the initial years, we invested hugely in building the capacities of women. Building their confidence was the main thing. And today we are very happy to say that they are a rich social capital that we have. And for many of the programs across ministries in the Government of India, everybody is asking that we would like to implement these programs through your self-help group women. So this is a very, very encouraging trend that we are seeing, that finally the role of women is being accepted or being acknowledged. The second thing that I would like to tell you about here is the role of women as farmers was not given much of an importance. It's very important to recognize their role, because unless and until, and it's very evident, India being a country heavily dependent on agriculture for its GDP, also has a large number of women participate in agricultural operations. But if you do not recognize their role, the productivity in terms of agriculture is not going to go up. So we have this Mahila Kisan Sashakti-karan Pariyojana, or it is the Farmers Development, Women Farmers Development Program effort, which is being taken up by the NRLM. And with the convergence with other schemes of the Government of India, we are trying to create agriculturally ecological practices which go a long way in reducing the investment in agriculture and in turn increasing the returns from agriculture. The other important, and so all of this is leading to some kind of an economic participation, or making women economically a very viable entity. I mean, I'm sorry for that word, it making them economically very, very relevant as far as the economic growth in the country is concerned. The other good lessons that we have learned as of now is the political participation. So while we have the urban local bodies and the Panchayat Raj institutions in the rural areas with 33% reservation for women, but it is seen that the participation of women has increased by leaps and bounds, and in many parts of the country, including the northern India, the political participation has increased and this number has gone up. So they are contesting on general seats as well. Not to talk about the success rate in Kerala, where the women's participation is so strong that today you go anywhere, the self-help group women are represented across all federations, across all political institutions. So here is something that I would like to share with you in terms of the early results through various studies that we have seen. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So while the slide comes in, the bank credit of US $32 billion has been accessed since 2013-14, and share of poorer northern states has increased from 10.3% to 24%. And why I mention this? So in India, there's a huge north-south divide, both in terms of social conditions as well as the economic conditions. While the southern states of the country have done exceedingly well in terms of organizing the women self-help groups and deploying them in various economic activities, but the pace of this deepening of community building and participation was much slower. But I'm very happy to share with you that many of the backward, so-called backward states earlier, they are now leading the country in terms of their women's mobilization, which is Bihar, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, and Chhattisgarh. So the other very important aspect that has been illustrated by IRMA in 2017 through a study, that the SHG members perceive they themselves say that it has made a huge impact on their self-esteem, meaning building up their confidence and the increased bank linkage. So this is so important for a woman, and as a woman, I understand that nothing can be more important than the self-esteem that you carry with you. Multiple studies have indicated that wherever there was penetration or we had intensive blocks, there were higher number of enterprises in the NRLM, and more assets were found to be seen in these areas. I think the number was about 22% higher assets in areas where the deepening is 100% or saturation activities have taken place. Happy to tell you that this transition is being led by community resource persons, the women from the community who are coming forward to share their experiences and to train other women members. One of the most interesting experiments that we have done is the banking corresponding DDs, or women who are now playing a very vital role in financial inclusion and digital inclusion across the length and breadth of the country. So during COVID, these women were, they go around on their scooters or two-wheelers, and then they have these machines through which they are able to deliver money to the most weak section of the society, the widows, the old, infirm, etc. So that's a great activity that has happened. We have about 40,000 of these women now, and we plan to reach to each and every village very shortly. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Now, coming on to the women's collectives, and that's where we are currently.
Sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to wind up in a minute. My sincere apologies, because we have 3 more speakers.
Sure. So I'm not going to get into the issues which all of you know. What are the issues? But I will just like to flag on 2 or 3 issues. One is mobilization of capital for women entrepreneurs, and 2, to have that business sense and to prepare the business models. And I mean, everybody knows the backward and the forward linkage, etc., those things which have to be strengthened. Next slide, please. I would just like to dwell on a couple of things that we have done. Next slide, please. Yeah. So what is it that needs to be done? We need to prepare the producer collectives. What we have done is create a Section 8 company with the Ministry of Rural, within Ministry of Rural Development, with the Tata Trust and FDR, known as the FDRBC, that is the Foundation for Development of Rural Value Chains. We are trying to promote producer collectives across the country with the simple mission I, which is together we prosper. And this is an end-to-end window for collecting the women for making their business plans, providing professional support, so on and so forth. My next slide would quickly, a good environment. We have a lot of concessions. So like the collateral-free loan has been raised from 10 lakhs to 20 lakh rupees. Overdraft facility to each member of, at least one member of the self-help group, the mudra loans and so on. So can you go to the next slide, please? So today we have altogether promoted about 175 enterprises. PEs, producer enterprises with more than 50 lakhs turnover is about 38, and we already have 23 PEs with more than 1 crore turnover. And average number is somewhere around 3,000 to 4,000. We are now looking at involving greater numbers, especially the milk cooperatives or the agri-based commodities directly related to farming activities and the other allied activities where the numbers are very high and the turnover is very good. And the investment, so to say, is favored by the current schemes through the Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Food Processing Industries, and the Ministry of Rural Development. Can we go to the next slide, please?
Alka-ji, I'm going to have to ask you to stop. I'm really sorry. We still have 3 more people to speak. Please forgive me.
This is this Malav Mahila Milk Producer Company set up in Madhya Pradesh, which has been doing very well since August 2017. The turnover is given over here. And next slide, please. We have, they are supplying milk to the ice cream manufacturers, confectionaries, mother dairy, etc. Then we have another one in Bastar. So there are a lot of activities happening. Just go to the last slide quickly, which is a recap of what we are to do. So, okay, yeah, this is the last one. 29,000 secondary level federations and 321,000 primary level federations through the National Rural Economic Transformation Project, which the World Bank has given us, and through the technical assistance being provided to us through the BMGF and many other such organizations. We want to move on to create many farmer producer organizations, non-farm activities, rural clusters, and go a long way in the digital finance. So thank you very much. Although a little rushed, I would have loved to speak more, but time constraint, of course, limits all of us, and there will be many more opportunities to interact with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alka-ji. And again, my apologies because it's such a rich experience. I go straight to our next speaker, Tsigie Tadale, who's the advisor to the Minister, Ministry of Women, Child and Youth, Government of Ethiopia. She's a passionate advocate for the rights of women and gender equality. As a member of the Management Council in the ministry for the past 5 years, she's an important decision maker working towards resource mobilization and partnership with various intergovernmental and international organizations, as well as civil society organizations. Ms. Tadale has an MA in Leadership and Good Governance from the Ethiopian Civil Service University. Tsigie Tadale, the floor is yours for the next 12 minutes.
Okay, thank you so much, Maria. It's a great pleasure to speak Ethiopian experience regarding with gender equality and women empowerment through economic empowerment. Before starting my presentation, I wanted to speak the government of Ethiopia and Indian government. You know, Ethiopia and India are sister countries which have been recording the human civilization for the world. And also I want to share with you. And also from, you can see from the slide, Ethiopia is land of origin from humans, and also within the 30 months of sunshine. And also in Ethiopia, there are more than 18 ethnic groups with their unique cultures. The country political structure is 10 federal states and also 2 city administration. And also regarding population, the second most populous country in Africa with more than 100 million population. Regarding with female population, it constitutes 49.8%. Next slide, please. Regarding with the policies, legal and institutional frameworks that promote gender equality and women empowerment, the first law is our constitution, which stipulates Article 35, reiterate the principle of equality, access to economic empowerment, including the right to equal employment between men and women. It grants all Ethiopian equality between the law and special women's equal rights with the men. The national policies, there are different kinds of policies that help us to gender equality and women empowerment. The first one is the family law under the criminal code. The several policies have been formulated to create conducive environment for sustainable development. Most of these policies have incorporated gender mainstreaming. And also the country has its own national women policy, which has organized in 1993. And also the Ministry of Women, Children and Youth developed and launched the National Gender Mainstreaming Guidelines in terms of promoting women economic empowerment. And also the country has international commitment signatory like CEDAW, Beijing, and the regional commitments, and also the Africa Agenda 2063 𝐂𝐸𝐬𝐧𝐠. Next slide. In terms of economic empowerment, which helps women empowerment through entrepreneurship and enterprise, especially the federal rural law and administration and the youth proclamation and regional laws provide for the right of women to acquire land use rights certification for especially rural women. Next slide. Regarding with the human entrepreneurship and women enterprise, one of the most important strategy which helps the women enterprise, the expansion of micro and small enterprise strategy, which helps many women have been engaged in enterprises. And also it creates women entrepreneurs and bolster female employment, and also facilitating access to finance through saving and credits, capacity building and skills training in business and entrepreneurship, market access for women and entrepreneurs. This is because of the strategy which has been stipulated, the expansion of micro and small enterprise strategy in Ethiopia for the last 10 years. Next slide. Within the last 10 years, the first growth transformational plan and the second Ethiopian transformational plan, about 2.2 million women entrepreneurs have been organized. The entrepreneurs have been engaged within construction. Many women have been engaged in construction in the capital city of Ethiopia and other regional cities. And also the women have been engaged in urban agriculture and also the micro, small enterprise engaged in different small and medium manufacturing industries. And also within the last 10 years, it created about 3.9 million new jobs. Between this, about 48%, 7% were occupied by women. And also in terms of the rural women, we know Ethiopia is an agrarian society. More than 80% of population is living in rural areas, and also from the rural population, women have constitute half of their population. So about 2.7 rural women have found new income generating opportunities in the agriculture. Next slide. During this time, Ethiopia have been planning the coming 10 years development plan. This plan is known as the Progress Plan. The country has 10 years development plan in terms of economic, social, and political, as well as cultural transformation. So within the 10 years development plan, the country is going to strive for gender equality and women empowerment, putting different strategies. One of the most important property rights of the woman is accessing land and certification, and also access to credit and participated income generating activities, 33% up to 55% within the next 10 years, up to Sustainable Development Plan 2030. And also women are members of cooperatives from 30 up to 50%, more of equality within men counter. And also in terms of the micro to small enterprise, now it has 41%. Within the next 10 development plan, it reaches 50%.
They're motivated large corporate, multilateral, and government buyers with women-owned businesses. These are suppliers from around the world. Over the last 12 years, we've conducted proprietary annual studies to document global trends, including the sourcing patterns of large buyers. This data, combined with the data collected from over 110 large buying organizations, enables us to confidently estimate that while women represent about 1/3 of all private businesses, unfortunately, they earn less than about 1% of the global spend of large organizations on products and services. So this fact represents a massive market failure and points to the systemic inequalities in access to markets for women-owned businesses, especially compared to male-owned businesses. And this is especially true for women working in the informal sector who have neither the legal protections or the tax IDs required to do business with very large buyers. We Connect International helps these large buyers by increasing and improving their global inclusive sourcing efforts. You want to level the playing field by making sure that it's based on true opportunity for all businesses, competition, and innovation. We were launched by major corporations, and these corporations today, as you can see, they represent over $1 trillion in annual purchasing power. And we work every day with our local partners to support a growing database of thousands of women-owned businesses that are based now in over 120 countries. These women-owned businesses of all sizes and all sectors can go to weconnectinternational.org and register their business into the database for free. So registering in the global network is one of the best ways for these corporations to find your business or to find the businesses that you serve if you're a service provider helping women-owned businesses. And you can see that these very large corporations are from all sectors. They literally buy everything you can possibly imagine. And it also includes major multilateral buyers. So we work with the World Bank Group, we work with the United Nations Procurement Department, and other governments that are looking to source more from women-owned businesses. We can also certify that these businesses are at least 51% owned, managed, and controlled by one or more women. We can do that in almost 50 countries now, which represents about 60% of the world's population across Asia, Africa, Europe, the Americas. And this helps to helps buyers to feel confident that when they go out of their way to try to source inclusively, and in this case from women-owned businesses, or it could be ethnic minority-owned businesses, people with disabilities, members of the LGBTQ community, and others. But when they're trying to be inclusive in their sourcing practices, they want to know that that money is actually going to those communities. And it might be a grassroots organization. So they want to know that this is a social enterprise or whatever it is they're targeting when they look to source their products and services. So we work with partners, we publish reports. There's one we did with the Council on Scaling Women-Owned Businesses. These were major financial institutions, all coming down together to understand how do we break down these barriers to access to markets, and how does that link to access to capital so that these businesses can really grow and thrive. The report, Rebuilding Global Business for Good, it's a free report, and it does provide a strategy for how we thrive in a COVID and post-COVID environment with women at the center as innovators and job creators. As all of you know, when women of all these different backgrounds gain access to the right tools, the right resources, the organizations like the ones that are being featured here today, they in turn reinvest their income into the better health and welfare and education of their households and of the communities that they're a part of. So closing this gender gap, this huge disparity gap, this massive market failure will add trillions of dollars to the global GDP and help all of us achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals over the next 10 years. We also certify or survey very regularly the women business owners in these 120 countries to try to understand the impacts specifically of COVID-19. Those results are available online for free. So if you want to check that out, you can see how these women-owned businesses are being impacted. Again, almost all of it is negative impact from the pandemic, but you also see that there are stories of resilience, that these women-owned businesses are fighting hard to build their resiliency and willing to do whatever it takes to keep their doors open and their employees protected as long as possible by leveraging technology and business networks like the ones we're talking about today. An excellent example of what can be done at the grassroots level is the SEWA Cooperative 𝐂𝐨𝐬𝐬𝐬. In 2008, the waste recycling industry crashed internationally, and the waste pickers' income shrank because of the crash, and everything was privatized, and it had a hugely negative impact on the women who worked in this sector. So SEWA set up a production unit to manufacture value-added products made from recycled waste and documented the evolution of them going from an informal producers unit to a successful women-owned and run enterprise known as 𝐂𝐨𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬. This collective social enterprise where business venture comes with social objectives. They're built on a collective work and ownership, and it's a powerful way to upgrade the employment options available to women working in low-paid and informal jobs. Successful social enterprises focus on women as economic actors who focus on actual demand for their solutions while leveraging the enabling technology that's needed to succeed. So 𝐂𝐨𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬's production of stationery and other office products was facilitated by a collaboration with We Connect International, but also a small grant from the World Bank Group and technical support from the corporation Accenture. So together, the sisters were able to organize, formalize, and develop products that were actually purchased by very large buyers such as Staples and other large local buyers such as Gopi Stationery in India. Gitanjali was successful because the sisters were subject matter experts who, in spite of most of them being illiterate and innumerate, were passionate about the organization that they created and wanted to leverage technology and unique partnerships to lead to the production of products that are marketable and supported by a steady client base. And this case study demonstrates the power of women's collective social enterprises and the potential that corporations can have by providing not only markets for competitive women-made products and services, but corporations can also provide technical assistance on what they source, how they source, what to expect of their vendors, and how to compete for their business. So these connections between civil society organizations, women's enterprises, and motivated large buyers focused on diversifying their sourcing options is a huge opportunity to move towards a more inclusive global economy. And all of us as individuals and leaders of organizations have significant collective purchasing power, and we can't afford to wait for governments to change policies. And instead, we simply need to buy more products and services from women-owned businesses. And we have to do this every day in a very conscious way to own and leverage that power to ensure that at least some of our money is going to women-owned businesses offering competitive solutions, including those products and services offered by women's collective social enterprises. And now I'm really looking forward to hearing from Madhu Krishna, the Deputy Director for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Elizabeth. I think you've given us a lot of food for thought and lots of really concrete examples that are exciting. How social enterprises can join hands with the private sector. Last but not least, I'd like to come straight away to Ms. Madhu Krishna, who's the Deputy Director, Water, Sanitation and Hygiene.
As a foundation, we've been, of course, a strong supporter of women's empowerment collectives, or WECs, from very early initiation of our work, both in India and in other priority geographies. So our partners work with women's empowerment collectives in all their diversity, be it microcredit-based self-help groups and their federations, informal worker collectives, or the collective social enterprises. We see that these institutions are key to ensuring a more gender equitable world, building on the social and economic capital that gets built in the process. So governments across the world have recognized this potential of WECs in the development and poverty alleviation strategies. And in India, for instance, the government's focus on ensuring a large coverage of self-help groups that we heard from Madam Upadhyay and their federations has been core to our work in gender equality. As many of you have spoken about the pandemic, and I don't think we can get away from that, it's really been an unprecedented one for the global community, but for gender equality in particular. We've fallen so back on many gains that we've made earlier. Collective social enterprises have suffered in this lockdown and have had to choose close production, have also experienced breaks. Global evidence shows that women-led businesses were 2 times more likely to permanently shut their operations in the COVID crisis. Job losses, as many of you have touched upon, are far more severe for women as they lose both their jobs and their enterprises at much higher rates than men, given both the fragility of their work and the sectors in which their enterprises operate. And they're also facing a crisis in a manifold increase in their care burden, as childcare and household work continue to unfairly keep them out of the workforce. But we also heard that it was women's collectives have played a front-runner role in the COVID response and resilience, despite the setbacks to their own businesses and the breaks in supply chain. In India, of course, there are numerous stories about the amount of work that self-help group women, communities stood up response teams, not only to provide basic government social and economic protection, but creating a strong delivery platform for emergency response, largely on their own initiatives. The efforts to help organize the groups and the focus training and skill building over the years on a variety of issues, of course, took them in good stead. As again, we noted again and again through this discourse today, leadership came from the groups because women themselves have leadership and community consciousness that is very lacking in other groups. Producers of safety equipment, they organize themselves as providers of emergency relief, community kitchens, and connecting poor households with government relief as it poured in. So from this emerges our learning, the fact that expanding our investments, building human capabilities, and strengthening livelihoods and enterprises through women economic collectives is a no-brainer for society, for women, and for the next generation. And I'd like to share just a few reflections from our work and how we can do this better, and what we at the Gates Foundation will be supporting our partners on. First, we have to recognize that women's economic and social empowerment are inextricably linked. Our work with the WEX has taught us that we need to address barriers to both social as well as economic gender equality for real advancement of women. We know from global data that when women work, economies grow. And we know that they can potentially contribute $13 trillion to the global economy by 2030. And in India, we expect an increase of 27% just by enabling women's labor force participation, an increase by 27% in our GDP. And that's our first message for everyone. Removing gender barriers and enabling women's access to economic and public life on an equal footing is non-negotiable. And it is the first step towards women's economic empowerment and the empowerment of the next generation. Recognition, reduction, and redistribution of unpaid care and domestic work is a high priority on this agenda. Addressing gender-based violence inside the home, at work, and in public places is the second. Other areas of discrimination continue to be in the biased access to women that women have to higher education skills and access to digital tools, and continued social norms on early marriage and limited economic opportunities. All of these keep them out of their economic potential. So we have to ensure that there are intentional gender strategies for integration in all economic policy making and programming priorities. In this year, when we faced with the Generation Equality Forum, we called for an economic recovery in which women are not only recipients of benefits, but where they actively control the decisions and exercise their choice and agency in all spheres for creating a better life for themselves and their families. So economic stimulus packages that earmark resources for the most vulnerable enterprises, such as in India, we've seen the government design some of these dedicated support schemes to street vendors and other schemes that are now being formulated. Public and private sector can both play a role in creating assured markets for the collective social enterprises. We just heard the potential of doing that through Elizabeth's speech before mine. And we believe that in the public sector, there are many state governments that have set such procurement targets, as well as providing business skills and mentoring and leveraging digital platforms for helping to expand the market linkages for women's enterprises. The collectives offer an opportunity to build a much more resilient economic framework for men and women to participate more effectively through creating stronger backward and forward linkages and building greater access to both skills and formal credit. Through collectivization, women can be provided greater efficiencies in inputs, information skills, and financial access. Our efforts are in all these areas, using the resources available through multiple sets of national and state government-sponsored schemes, targeting poor households. In addition, expanding access of women to entitlements are also an area that we are supporting with the government to provide a basic safety net to vulnerable women and their households. Thirdly, we are recognizing that the private sector has an important role to play. And this will help in expanding collective social enterprises. And it's critical that the private sector is brought in to help design suitable financial products and services, leverage gender lens and impact investing to expand access to markets, and bridging the gender digital divide, and introducing new technology and platforms that women can operate in. We believe the private players, community institutions such as our self-help group and their federations, and the public sector can create very strong partnerships that can leverage the value of each of those groups for greater resilience and sustainability of these platforms. We also hope that the private sector can work with us to create and introduce the collectives to a new set of business partners and help boost their enterprises. And therefore, we need a public policy which can provide suitable incentives for this partnership to flourish. Fourthly, while the market opportunities expand, there's also a really important role to be played by grant-making organizations and philanthropists locally to support the on-ground processes of building. We believe we can focus on some of the key areas where we believe we can drive maximum impact. One of those is to build scalable and impactful solutions to reduce the gender gap in profitability and evaluating the best approaches to improving women's enterprises, developing innovations in service linkages and increasing access to benefits through self-help group federations, and linking women to services through convergence strengthening and digital innovations such as our Gender Resource Center, leveraging the use of digital tools and technologies to enable women's access to participatory learning platforms and strengthening their enterprises, and building robust evidence through a national hub and a state center to generate evidence on cost effectiveness and impact of women's groups to facilitate their economic empowerment. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Madhu. We still have a few more minutes, and we have had a wonderful set of questions, but I'm afraid now we can only take two. So couple of the ones that perhaps the speakers would like to address. First, what are the global commonalities women-owned and women-run enterprises experience? Gaps can civil society organizations fill in supporting the collective enterprises in terms of a short-term intervention? I see Renana Bhen, I see Elizabeth, Tsigie Tadale is with us, Tsigie Haile is with us. Unfortunately, Anita ji is no longer with us, and I'm not sure about Alka ji, but would anyone like to take a shot at this, please? What are the global commonalities women-owned and run enterprises experience? We have heard some of this, but I think it would be nice. And Madhu also spoke to it to some extent. Madhu, would you like to give it a...
Thanks, Mirai. I think some common gaps are around helping collective enterprises with a many more skills around their financial accounting, business planning, and their ability to sort of forecast their businesses around market trends. I think those are some key gaps that we often see, especially as enterprises stand up. I think that those are some of the areas that both civil society as well as the private sector can help enterprises see. Those are some key gaps that we see. It's kind of under the gap of business, but also new technologies, and sometimes they're pretty simple and well known in the private sector, but don't reach, especially our rural enterprises. So those are some of the gaps that I think we would like to address.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much. Alka ji, would you like to come in? And also, what kind of gaps can civil society organizations fill in supporting the collective enterprises, particularly in the short term?
So one, we have to understand government can't fill in this role. Governments are not meant to do businesses. They are meant to one, mobilize, one, empower, and two, provide funds at the best and create an environment, the policy framework. But as far as organizing businesses, etc., are concerned, it's the civil society organizations and aggregators of the world which need to step in to promote businesses. Government can only have a very limiting role in terms of policy and enablers. Now, coming to civil societies, again, I would say civil societies also need to step out into the world, and two important contributions are required. One, as I said, and I have been facing this all over, and and I've also experienced this as a global phenomena, is the working capital. The first lot of working capital is the most difficult thing to get. You may get money for setting up an enterprise or infrastructure development, but this is something that we lack in. So one is that getting some kind of a working capital, and two, to enable and have a partnership where businesses have assured, supply chains. That is something where the civil society organization.
Thank you very much. Anyone else would like to add on? Elizabeth? Renana?
Thank you. I definitely defer to Renana, who's the expert in how do you serve literally millions of women who have great potential and are offering and developing fantastic products and services and connecting them to markets through partnerships. So Renana, we defer to you.
Well, I just like to raise 2 points. And one is taking off from what Alkaji just said, which is there is no real system for bringing finance for business to especially first-time finance, and maybe the next time also, to women businesses and women's collectives. We have a microfinance system which actually reaches small loans, and then we have the business finance which actually reaches very large loans. We need to develop a whole system of micro business financing, which would reach out to these women. So I think, and would be gender sensitive, like microfinance is. So I think we need a new financial system, a new financial set of players to actually reach out to these women. And the second thing, I think policy plays a very, very important role. So government policy for promoting women's collectives, I think is very key. And there's not time, but we have a whole list of policies which we think would help women to promote their collectives.
Thank you very much. And I regret very much that I have to now close this very interesting conversation. We have so much more to share and learn from each other. So this is just a beginning. I'd like to thank most sincerely all the speakers. And again, my apologies for having to cut some of you off. We also have put up the video on our YouTube, and you've seen the repeated links given to you in the chat. We will also be developing a policy brief with all the rich data and material that came from each one of you. And that will be made available not just on our website, but we will send that out as widely as possible to all of you. And finally, I would like to thank all our wonderful audience and participants who were patient. I regret that I could not give you more time for questions, but I wish you well. And we'll keep meeting and we'll keep the dialogue going, because we have a long journey to go, but we have faith in women's enterprises and women's leadership, as you've heard today. And I'm sure that women's economic empowerment and self-reliance one day will be a reality. Thank you very much.